Hey everyone, welcome back to the Invite Me In podcast show with the experts in education. We are Dr. Jocelyn Taylor.
Hello, it's nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you, Jocelyn. The lady Brittany Taylor Brock.
Hello.
And I'm Jonathan Brock. And this is where experience and passion heal. In our last episode, we introduced ourselves and what we're all about as a team and as a business, and we introduced a topic to you that is taking much of our bandwidth right now as professionals and with our partners in the field right now. They are now working on this with us. We introduced you the topic of the cultural framework that everybody in this world has, and we have titled that as our model, Chivalry. It's a cultural framework model that explains how every human being has protective layers that are part of their culture that protect them from human relations that are awful, things that happen in the world, and specifically when we get misidentified or misunderstood because someone doesn't understand who we are.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going to dive into today is to tell you about the Chivalry Model, the 7 hallmarks of it, and we hope that by the end of this podcast, you will see that every person, including students and especially, have their own cultural framework. Every human being has at least 7 protective layers or 7 hallmarks of their culture, and race and ethnicity, as we discussed in the last one, are only one. So with that, Dr. Taylor, would you talk about how we came to the conclusion of what chivalry and culture is?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, we went to the literature, we went to the research, and we looked at a lot of technical definitions of culture. And they weren't what we were looking for. They didn't have the elements that we needed to see. We found one by Samovar and Porter in 1994, and we really liked this. I'm going to read it to you really fast, and so you understand that it's really big and broad, and then we will break it down to you in palatable and understandable pieces. Culture refers to the cumulative deposit of knowledge, experience, beliefs, values, attitudes, meanings, hierarchies, religion, notions of time, roles, spatial relations, concepts of the universe, and material objects and possessions acquired by a group of people over time through individual and group striving. We loved it, and we loved it because it was so broad and comprehensive, and it really told us what culture was. But using this as a definition is quite cumbersome. As we thought about what does this really mean, and what is one word that could describe different elements of this, we came up with our acronym.
Chivalry.
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 Chivalry. Yeah. So you're shivering with anticipation to find out what those chivalries are.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Stop.
One thing I would love to
That's
note,
funny.
Jocelyn, as you've brought us that definition, is we're a months and months into this model now and getting it out into the field. We've already had our first case study with it earlier this year that we'll draw upon and talk about in these podcasts, and we have current partners who are working with us to implement this model, and we have case study going, and this is really actually out there. It's actually working.
Well, and what I'm so excited about is our preliminary results show that lives have been changed once they use this cultural framework. I'm so excited to get into it to tell them what it is. We have formative data that tells us how children's lives and how adult in the education world, how their lives and how their thinking has changed. So that's why we know it's working, because it is working.
And all of these elements, they're very heavily research-based, and we can predict. We can predict that if this is implemented in your school or organization, that you will actually have outcomes that you want to see.
And I'm going to flip that. We can predict that if you don't understand these cultural hallmarks, that nothing's going to change. You're going to keep getting the same old, same old. And when I say that, is the experiences that I referenced in the last podcast regarding the incidents of racial harassment and the findings of the Department of Justice in coming in and looking at everything that was happening. It was student on student, it was race on race, it was adult on student. It was awful. No one wanted it to happen, but they were deliberately indifferent, meaning they did not have a response. Therefore, they were liable under the law, and it's cost a lot in terms of money and resources, but it's taken an emotional toll
Yes.
on these people that I worked with. I had heads on my shoulders, tears, I had sadness. At the time, I was the director over about 240 employees. They were devastated. They said, "This isn't who we are." It was sad. It was really sad because it wasn't who they were. They just did not know what to do about it.
That's two things that you just said, Jocelyn, that were valuable, that we want to drive home with this Chivalry model. Number one, if people had an understanding of another person's cultural framework and knew how to use it and build and grow their relationship with them,
protect it.
And protect
And
that.
protect it.
As we said,
protect and nourish it.
That's the second point I was going to make.
Oh, sorry.
No, you were right on. The second point is Chivalry, this cultural framework, is addressing the different parts of our own identity that make us who we are. That is what culture is.
And it's taking that research-based definition that comes right out of the literature, and it's making it easier to understand.
Absolutely.
So with that, are we ready to spill the beans?
I think we're ready to do it. With the caveat, remember, we're talking to the audience of the world. Every human has a Chivalry
that can be nourished and protected.
Absolutely. With that, what is the Chivalry model? It's an acronym for 7 cultural hallmarks, and those are this: spirituality and identity, household practices and norms, interpersonal interactions and communication styles, a person's own value system, their ethnicity and race, which of course applies to every human, we all have one, and religion and that dogma, and then last is a person's belief system. That is the Chivalry framework.
Can I say something too?
Absolutely.
This framework allows us to talk about ourselves. Right now, the message that kids are receiving, that everybody is receiving, is you can't talk about this.
Oh, yeah,
you can't talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't talk about this because you'll offend someone.
Don't do
You'll
this.
offend someone here.
Don't
and
do that.
we also want you to talk about your trauma because we really don't want you to have trauma. But we're not going to let you talk about this, this, and this, and this. Guess what? It's not working at all.
You know what? I'm glad that you made that point. Because in response to the situation that I had talked about earlier, the school district made, they made some really good attempts to try and fix things. One of the attempts, I feel like, was kind of a negative approach. Kids were saying, no more, no more. So they were told what they couldn't say again. So to your point, everybody knows what they can't say.
Well, and to their credit, they were at that point. They got to the point where they had to say no more because nobody's been asking them, tell me more, invite me in. Nobody's asking that.
Invite me in.
They do have to be on the defense. Now we're going to go on the offense.
With the offense, yeah, I love that. The facts are the facts, what you just laid out. Let's now reset the conversation about cultural sensitivity through the lens of every person that we know at a job, in our family, our neighbors, regardless of what state in the country we live in or country, has a Chivalry. We're asking you to totally look at culture from a whole new perspective. Every human has one. That's why we've developed this. And it applies to all industries. Any place that has human beings working together, a business, a company, a school, neighbors, Chivalry applies to all people. So with that...
Well, let me just say that everyone has a Chivalry, and everyone has the human right to have their Chivalry protected
Right.
and nourished.
And shared if they want.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
It's as if we're talking right now about every human being of all ages has a right to protect their identity.
So the whole idea of invite me in, that was one of the pieces that made such a difference in many of my employees' lives.
Mm-hmm.
They said, oh, now I can invite this child in and I can ask questions to this child. What is important to you? What do your household practices look like? What does your family value? There were so many insights that came from the concept of invite me in, because it's okay to talk about the shiver beads.
Spirituality and identity. What is that? How does that define us? We, though, as a team in our Chivalry, we define a person's spirituality as meaningful connections with the human experience, with a source or a concept or bigger than self, which this can result in a deep sense of belonging and interconnectedness. Spirituality in us, it's a direct reflection of our concepts of our place in the world and our reckoning of self and purpose. For example, students experience the growth of their spatial relations, how they view themselves and the world around them, in the sense they can see their future self, where they fit in it, and who they're developing into. And in essence, spirituality in some way or another is saying, I have to reconcile myself with, and then thrive with a concept, an idea, or a force that's bigger than myself.
So what's cool about spirituality is that we don't have to agree on religion.
And this
We don't have to agree on how to do things. We know that everyone has a spirituality regardless of anything else, and it is to be invited in. It is acceptable. It helps to heal the soul.
Yeah.
and
core.
just to clarify, the spirituality, we're not referring to religion
No.
in this
Not in
shiver,
this, not
in this
one.
particular
Mhm.
one.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that
Yeah,
up,
yeah,
because
yeah.
when I first launched this, there was some confusion. People were blending spirituality and religion together.
Uh-huh.
And when you talk about religion in a big, large group, people get irritated, and they, like, it brings out some anxiety in people. So once we clarified that spirituality is not religion, and religion has its own shiverbee place, then it became easier to talk about.
Good.
One reason it does become easy is when you separate the two. We see, and this informed our definition of spirituality. Probably, if not every human being at some point in their life, their age, they realize that they are spiritual. And if you look at our definition of that cultural framework, that means they're trying to find their place or where they fit in the world, and that interconnectedness with the human family, and then a sense of higher purpose. And that doesn't have to be religious. It could be it could be a personal passion.
And it's even holding themselves to a higher standard.
Yeah.
That can be considered
Which
spirituality.
humans, developmentally, humans want to be able to do that. Humans want to be able to progress and grow and become better and have that higher standard for themselves.
Students want that. A beautiful thing about this,
Parents want that.
Parents and homes want that. If you're an educator out there in any capacity hearing this, we hope that you're already thinking about, wow, how I interact with my students. If I really want to get to know who they are, I got to get to know their cultural framework. And one implication of that is there might be some things that you see that you're already doing because of your relationships with students or wherever you are. And you've already invited yourself in. If you've done that, you're modeling that, what we're saying. So let's say you're hearing this for the first time. You're thinking, oh my gosh, race and ethnicity. I thought that was the whole thing behind cultural sensitivity. It's one of 7. Every person on the earth, in sense, is a spiritual person. They have a spirituality because they're all trying to find their place in the world and how they're going to contribute to it. And we are all driven by some higher ideal. It doesn't have to be a religious one. It can be a moral, ethical one. That's spirituality.
Because we're humans.
We are.
We're humans.
And
we're designed to.
Oh, kids in our house, our spouses, our neighbors, our family, our coworkers, students in school, they're all looking for us to show them how to connect with their higher self and become. So Chivalry,
And they're looking for permission to be spiritual.
that's a good point.
Right?
Yeah.
They don't have to hide it.
So what's the next
And
one?
if someone doesn't consider that they are spiritual, that's their Chivalry.
The Chivalry turns the discussion.
Well, that's a point.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't want to
A
interrupt
spiritual
you there.
person, meaning I'm trying to find where I fit in the world. That's my spirituality.
From that perspective, I would argue that because of the human development, I would argue that everyone is spiritual.
Absolutely.
From that perspective.
With our definition.
Because they're seeking for something.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. This next one in Chivalry, the H, I struggle with this one, might be the most important one. They all are, but this one for me over the last year, the H stands for household practices and norms. Let's look in terms of either how you grew up, or if we're educators, how students are growing up. What are these household practices and norms that make a person that contribute to a person's cultural framework, and how do they define us? Our definition of house is these are the methods and the thinking and routine that exist within a certain family or a home dynamic, which can be, but are not always influenced by ethnicity or the traditional culture beliefs. The household practices layer, they include traditions, roles, rules, and attitudes, modeled or accepted behaviors, notions and approaches to time, how people, kids, for example, view material possessions. They learn that at home, and the modeled lifestyles of the people that our students are reared with. All of these things contribute to the household practices and norms. Basically, if you're looking at a layman's terms, how's my student or how's my coworker? What's it like at home? What's it like in their private life? Those practices, those traditions, those routines, they actually shape the way we think and becomes part of our cultural framework. Ladies,
it does.
What think you on this one? Household practices and norms.
I agree with you that it is really huge, and here's why. I had some examples of some of my employees who came back after they invited the child and the families in to talk about their household practices. They discovered that there were things that were the norm at home that were not acceptable in school. That was really shocking.
Do you care to elaborate on that?
I could. Okay. So in one situation, there were two boys who were African American, and they had been adopted by a white family. These two boys, they were biological brothers. They called each other the N-word. So that was very shocking to the school. And so the school had said, that's a rule that we have here in this school district. We don't use the N-word. No N card. Let's talk about the N-word. It is one of the most degrading terms that you can call someone if you really look at the definition and the intent behind it.
It's vile.
But these boys, they were referring to each other as that. So they called the parents in and they said, parents, your sons are using this N-word with each other. They're calling each other this. And the father said, oh, well, that's what we call them. Well,
okay.
well, we were surprised by that, and they did not mean any ill harm.
No,
I don't know what the thinking was there. That was an example of something that was happening in the home that really explained to us what their household practices were. I'll tell you, there was another little guy who was just all over the place, very physical. He was taking his peers down in headlocks. He was what you would call a behavior problem. When my school psychologist invited the family in to talk about their household practices, guess what they found out? What was Dad? He was a wrestler.
Absolutely.
And that's what they did.
That's
they
actually
wrestled.
cute.
And so once they understood that is the household practice, then they were able to work with the family. But what understanding. So instead of looking at this little guy as a problem and he's violent.
And he's trying to be bad.
And he's trying to be bad.
That, right?
Oh, naughty,
and
naughty child.
We have to limit his identity by saying, don't do that.
Don't do that, or you go out in the hall. Yeah, when they discovered that this is how he interacted with his dad. And you love your dad, and your dad is never wrong. My dad can beat up your dad, right? Every kid loves their dad. So this is how dad interacted. And so that's how he showed interaction. That was really, really interesting.
As you
That's
share,
sweet.
as I share that, I think about how to apply this for our audience. If you're hearing this now, thinking, okay, I've got people in my life, I have students, I have people in my company or my neighbors. We're not condoning students wrestling around in headlocks and WWF, the Iron Sheik, bam. What we're saying is, this is a lot more for that boy than just he's cussing, he's a bad kid, or he's wrestling.
Right.
He's not trying to be a bully. He's trying to connect and
Yes.
identify with his peers in the way his household practices have shown him.
Exactly.
That is where the invite me in. Oh, let's stop and think.
It made such a big difference for this family. I mean,
Yeah.
they did a lot of things. I
Yeah.
mean, the father was able to chat with the boy and said, okay,
Sure.
okay, well, good for you. I'm really glad you took him down in that headlock. But let's just do this at home and let's have other behaviors at school.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's okay.
And keep in mind, over the lifespan of our many podcasts to come, we go into much more depth about this. You're just getting the nice Sherby definition today. Brittany, would you, and thank you, Dr. Taylor,
You're
for bringing
welcome.
up those perfect examples. Brittany, would you introduce to us the third piece of the Chivalry
Yes.
acronym?
Interactions. And that can be word choices, communication styles, the origins, right? And
Yeah.
what they're currently influenced by.
Yeah, human interaction.
Learned responses, right? That's a big
Yes.
one,
Yeah, it is.
especially in our communication disorder profession.
As you're explaining that, there in our definition, we even say that these interactions could be public, social, relational, and personal communications, which often include a mixing of language usage, ideas, and beliefs. Guys, do you see how big and deep this is?
Well,
So much farther past
Mhm.
just how we look and where we're from. Shiver culture is.
And there's also a geographic part of this interaction. So I lived in Venezuela for a time, and the interaction style there, they used a lot of hands.
Yeah.
And it was this. It isn't something that I would use in my home. I also lived in Iran for a period of time.
8 years.
8 years, yeah. And what I learned is my father would learn how to interact with them the way they interacted. So, when there was a traffic jam, a traffic snarl, which there were a lot back in those days, everybody would jump out of their cars and they would start yelling and screaming at each other. And so my father would do the same thing. He'd jump out and he'd start yelling and screaming and interacting.
That sounds like what Jonathan does, actually.
Yelling
Well,
and screaming.
When there's traffic.
There's 3 things in this life
Did you live
that drive me nuts, that I can't stand. okay?
Literally drive him nuts.
Ghosts,
Ghosts.
Wait, ghosts? Okay.
Bigfoot, because it's not real, but that's a whole other topic.
No,
Oh, the
don't even
4.
go
Okay,
there.
4,
Don't go there.
4. I don't like snakes and traffic. But you bring a point there. When those Iranian men were doing that, it's a term of endearment. They're socializing, connecting, trying to solve a problem in traffic. That's their shiverby.
So you're saying that you
Wait, Bigfoot is real, by the way.
Bigfoot is real.
If you only knew,
and-
folks. Anyway,
You
that's
should
for
see
another day.
You should see what our interactions are and our household practices are regarding this Bigfoot phenomenon.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
right and they're not, and that's what.
Oh, don't
No.
mansplain whatever.
I like the
Move
definition.
us on.
I like the part of our definition of interactions as a cultural framework. This piece, as we're developing these interpersonal communications, they shape our attitudes regarding society and regarding the merits and credibility of other human beings. So in this part of our Shiverby, that cultural part of our framework, again, it goes back to we're learning how to interact with people, and those interactions, how we respond. Look at yourself as maybe as a teacher. The students are learning that, and they're saying that's okay that I interact with other people in this way. Just think about our role as models.
What's interesting, though, is interact in this way according to this culture.
Yeah.
I'm leading to an example.
Please.
Recently, I've been binging out on the death of the Queen Elizabeth. I do adore her. I did adore her. My mother was a fan of hers. I mean, there's just a lot of history there. What was interesting to me is they had a very clear, distinct protocol. And if anyone interacted in a way that did not align with the stated protocol, they were viewed as being highly disrespectful. For example, when you see the royal family walking behind a funeral procession, they don't touch anyone or anything because that's considered to be an interaction that is not appropriate.
Right.
But unfortunately, Meghan and Harry, I think everybody knows who Meghan and Harry were. They're Americanized, right? And so they were holding hands. Just that interaction of holding hands blew the mind of the British monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Just that little interaction. It was just so interesting to me
Yeah.
how important interactions can be and how the interactions can mislead your intention, or it can help to clarify the intention.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
That's
it
interesting.
was interesting.
Thank you. That's a perfect real-time example.
Yeah, it was.
The V in our Chivalry model stands for value system. We could argue that this one or the interactions are most important. Remember, we're talking about a person's cultural framework, the 7 core pieces of it. Every person has a value system that's growing or has hit its point where they're not going to change it anymore. This is their value system. What do we define as a value system to help you see what a person's cultural framework? We define a value system as a person's approach to morals, ethics, and attitudes and interactions between humans. These core regards, these core values, they're principles, they're standards for a person. And they often influence the thoughts and attitudes that we have or other people have. The predictive behavior of other people is often because they have a value system. We know their values are a little bit. We can actually predict another person's behavior, including students, by knowing what their value system is, because you behave in what you value.
When you know their value system, you know what's important to them.
That's right.
And it could go wrong if you assume something about the value system. Can I give another
Yes.
example?
That would be perfect timing.
I had one of my employees bring in some students, and she was making some assumptions that the family valued grades and learning as much as she did.
Mm-hmm.
So she was reporting to the parents, he's not doing this and he's not learning this. And the parents were immigrants from the Marshallese Islands. And they said, well, we don't expect that he's going to graduate from college. We expect that he is going to have a trade. They did not value the grades the way the teacher did.
Which isn't a bad thing. It was just different.
It's
just
just
different.
different.
Yeah.
So the point was that she assumed that the family would value this, but their values were different. And once she invited the family in, she changed the way she worked with that student.
And how interesting as you bring this up. Your story reminds me of some similar things where I've had students of all ages and grades over the years who their value system comes out. And remember, students at younger ages, these systems, their identity, their values, they're still growing and being shaped, especially by other people. These students, their value systems comes out in the form in the way they choose to interact with other people. If they value kindness and respect, you'll see that that's part of their interaction style. These Chivalry pieces, this cultural framework, are all interwoven. Number 7, or excuse me, our E in Chivalry is ethnicity and race. We ask that as you listen to this, that you have a more global mindset, okay, a more human race mindset. We actually approach ethnicity and race with this definition. We see it as the collective attributes of a people. Nationality, it can come into play in the context of being influenced by origins and geographical locations, and we love that. Here's a definition from Jablonski from Penn State. Quote, race is understood by most people as a mixture of physical, behavioral, and cultural attributes. Ethnicity recognizes difference between people, mostly on the basis of language and shared ethnic culture. What say you two on race and ethnicity as a person's cultural framework.
And I see race, and I agree with everything. Race and ethnicity are different. They are different. Race is the color of someone's skin.
Mm-hmm.
Ethnicity relates to a geographic area where
Right.
they're from.
Yeah.
So I do make that distinction.
And every member of the human family all comes from, they have a language and they have an origin. We
Yeah,
need
they
to
do.
start seeing
Mhm.
race and ethnicity as a more global thing and not something to back into a corner and figure out some program how to address.
And
This is a bigger picture.
yeah, and once again,
Yeah.
to be able to talk about someone's race and ethnicity, everyone needs to be able to and allowed to.
And
Yes,
be comfortable
yes.
with
Mhm.
it. Another person's heritage and traditions, they're not uncomfortable. They're actually very sacred. This
Mhm.
whole invite
Mhm.
me in concept, this could be a game changer and a 180-degree turn for many people. And that's okay.
Well, and it has
It's
been. So
okay.
just the idea of
Yeah.
invite me in. So you ask the question, tell me about your race and your ethnicity. What does it mean to you? Instead of making assumptions, we say to the parent and the child, tell me about it. And then they talk, and then we figure out how to protect and nurture that.
Oh, and that
I
ties
love
right
that.
back to your daughter's brilliant definition of the layers using the earth.
Oh.
Remember, we're going to learn so much more about all this in coming podcasts. Religion and dogma is the R in our Shiver Bee cultural framework. Again, we're separating spirituality and religion as two separate hallmarks of our cultural framework. We define religion as a system of a dogma, a faith, worship. In other words, what are the absolutes that we can tie to
Mhm.
more of a
Mhm.
religious
It's like a
aspect?
set of rules,
It's like an
right?
organization, right?
Yeah, it is.
Organized religion.
Sure.
Mhm.
For some
Maybe
students,
not organized.
it could be or not. For some students, for some adults, again, regardless of your industry, uh, there are religious dogma that it actually influences those absolutes. They make simple and complex judgments for us. So we're trying to relate
Mhm.
ourselves again, but this way we're actually connecting with a higher being or a higher power. And
Right.
and you
Right.
know what? That's okay. There are many religions in the world, and each one of them is part of someone's Shiverbee, and therefore we love and respect religious
Mhm.
things. You know, in states, populations, communities where religion is a predominant thing among a demographic, this almost always comes into play in a negative way.
Yeah.
Almost
Mhm.
always.
Mhm.
Moving on to the last element in our Shiverbee framework, it's a belief system. Now, audience friends, we have wrestled over the last year in making sure that we pull value system and belief system apart and that they're two separate parts of a culture. Brittany, would you read that to us and kind of give us your interpretation of
On
a
the belief.
person's
On the
belief
belief.
system
Mhm.
versus a value system?
So this is
Okay.
the belief.
This is a
This
person's
is the
belief
this is what
system.
we've come up with for
Yeah,
the belief system.
part of their culture. Yeah.
It's their ideology for interpreting their self and the principles, trends, and constructs of their society. Um, it can be a set of thoughts about what is true and false, valid or invalid, fixed or a growth based, and even right or wrong, right?
Absolutely.
Right or wrong, right?
Right or wrong, right? Wrong.
But it's their beliefs or it's their ideology or set of principles that interpret their everyday reality,
The
right?
belief system, yeah.
Yeah.
This system, these beliefs that we have, they're influenced by our cumulative
Mhm.
knowledge that we gain, and then we take what we learn, and then we decide what we believe about it.
Mhm.
We're doing it every single day, and we have to draw the correlation again that if you're in the education world, how much do you know about your students' belief system? Have you really asked them? These things, knowing this framework, can change the
Mhm.
dynamic of your relationship with people. Again, as educators, we're looking at it as how do you get invited in? You have to ask. And then what we do is we provide partners and those, we provide them with a model and a process, a framework for having these discussions, and then even getting them into the very depths of the instructional cycle itself. In
Mhm.
essence, the whole organization's cultural, their value system, organizational culture. This whole Chivalry model forces all of us, regardless of our industry, to recalibrate
Yes.
how we view other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that we're working with a school right now, it's so exciting, who is learning how to embed the Chivalries into their instructional cycle.
Yes. Because guess what? And I know this might seem grim, but when there is the case going on of you are discriminating, you're racist, prove that you're not. Well, when you've embedded Chivalry into your instructional cycle,
Excellent point.
you can prove that.
Oh, that is a good point.
It's a lovely
because
point.
an accusation that we really
Mhm.
don't have a response to, and
Mhm.
it's easy for someone to say, you're a racist. That's hard to respond to.
Mhm.
And you go, but, I'm not, but no,
But
no,
I'm not.
I love everybody. How do you prove? How do you prove that you're not a racist? You prove it by valuing and implementing the Chivalry so that you are nourishing and protecting each layer of the student's culture
Mm-hmm.
and protecting each layer of your colleagues' cultures
Mhm.
as well.
Absolutely.
And your boss.
Mhm.
They
And
have
your
layers.
own.
Even though you want to bonk them on the head once in a while, your boss has layers that need to be protected.
You remind me of how I get lovingly chastised by my wife. It's like the Bugs Bunny cartoon. How many lumps do you want? I want 3 whole lot of lumps.
No. This only happens because
That only happens when they talk about Bigfoot.
Yes.
I
Oh,
say.
God.
that's exactly what I was going to
That's
say.
folks, please.
You know, there's a
Oh.
Bigfoot
Give it
convention
a-
starting tomorrow.
Oh,
you know
tomorrow.
what? Guess who
Give
won't
it
be
a-
there? Okay,
Guess who
so
might be there?
Guess who is going to be there?
lots of cool people.
Yes.
Where are we?
We're going to pull it all together here, and just to summarize, we hope that there's a lot of things that you're already learning. One of the takeaways that we hope that you have is that you start to consider the fact that most, if not all, misunderstandings, misjudgments, disagreements, harsh actions that you have either done towards or experienced with another human being, some way comes from a lack of understanding and a respect for these 7 elements of a human's cultural framework. Just think about the impact of this if this was in organizations, if it was in homes, if it was in schools, and these conversations were vulnerable
You
and
know,
open.
I don't have to think about the impact because I have seen the impact.
We all have.
So,
We are seeing it
based
right
on
now.
personal experience,
Yeah.
I
And-
have seen people's lives change. It's cool.
Brittany, you?
Yeah,
This is a
absolutely.
magic bullet.
We're-
Who says that it's a magic bullet? This
I
is.
hate
Is
that
that a
term.
Dracula
I don't
thing?
like
But-
that,
Or
but
no,
that's
I
true.
like it,
This
but it
is
I
the
don't know.
closest
This
thing
is.
to.
Werewolves.
That's why we're so excited to
We are.
continue to share it with you.
Yes.
We
You're
are.
going to love it and you'll love us.
You will. With that, this is the Invite Me In podcast show. We are the experts in education, and this is where experience and passion heal. See you soon.
Bye.